Start करो.
Good afternoon, all of you. The topic of my presentation is theory of international trade in services. First of all, we have to know that what is international trade. Trade is the concept of exchanging goods and services between two people or entities. International trade is then the concept of this exchange between people or entities in two different countries. People or entities trade because they believe that they benefit from the exchange. They may need or want the goods or services. While at the surface, this may sound very simple. There is a great deal of theory, policy, and business strategy that constitutes international trade. And the concept of international trade is the exchange of goods and services on a global level has a significant impact on a national economy as sport grows, thus increasing the balance of international payment and significantly contributing to countries' GDP. The need of international trade is first point is price of products. Second is quality of goods and services. Third, availability of products. Fourth, demand of goods. And the role of international trade is division of labor and specialization, optimum allocation and utilization of resources, raises standard of living of people, generates employment, improves quality of local product, and all. Now, what are the advantages of international trade? The advantages of international trade are competitive advantages. There are many competitive advantages, economy of scale, competition, transfer of technology, more job creation also. And the importance of international trade is on foreign exchange. Second, utilization of resources. Third, essential diversification. Fourth, improve organization and capacity of efficiency. And fifth, get government benefits. Now, the international trade theories. There are different types of theories. Uh, Basically, the theories are divided into two parts. First is passive country-based theory, and second is modern firm-based theory. Uh, Now, first I will talk about the classical country-based theories. First theory is mercantilism. Mercantilism is developed in the 16th century. Developed in the 16th century, mercantilism was one of the earliest efforts to develop an economic theory. This theory stated that a country's wealth was determined by the amount of its gold and silver holdings. In its simplest sense, mercantilists believed that a country should increase its holding of gold and silver by promoting export and discouraging imports. In other words, if people in other countries buy more from you exports than they sell to you imports, when they have to pay you difference in gold and silver, the objective of each country was to have a trade surplus or a situation where the village of exports are greater than the value of imports, and to avoid a trade deficit or a situation where the value of imports is greater than the value of exports. Now, the second theory is absolute advantage theory. In 1776, Adam Smith questioned the leading mechanism theory of the time in The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Recent versions have been edited by scholars and economists. Smith offered a new trade theory called absolute advantage, which focused on the ability of a country to produce a good more efficiently than other nations. Smith reasoned that trade between countries shouldn't be regulated or restricted by government policy or intervention. He stated that trade should flow naturally according to the market forces. In a hypothetical two-country world, if a country A could produce a good cheaper or faster or both, then country B then country A had the advantage and could focus on specialization on producing that good. Similarly, if country B was better at producing another good, it could focus on specialization as well. By specialization, countries would generate efficiencies because their labor force would become more skilled by doing the same task. Production would also become more efficient because there would be an incentive to create faster and better production, better to increase the specialization. Now the third theory is comparative advantage. The challenge to the it is a challenge of the absolute advantage theory was that some countries may be better at producing both goods and therefore have an advantage in many areas. In contrast, another country may not have any useful absolute advantages. To answer this challenge, David Ricardo, an English economist, introduced the theory of comparative advantage in 1817. Ricardo reasoned that even if a country A had the absolute advantage in production of both product, exploitation and trade, could still occur between two countries. Competitive advantage occur when a country cannot produce a product more efficiently than the other country. However, it can produce that product better and more efficiently than it does other goods. The difference between these two theories is subtle. Comparative advantage focuses on the relative productivity differences, whereas absolute advantage looks at the absolute productivity. Now, the fourth theory is Actual-Orlin theory, factor proportion theory, is also called a factor proportion theory. The theory of Smith and Ricardo didn't help countries determine which product would give a country an advantage. Both theories assumed that free and open market would lead countries and producers to determine which goods they could produce more efficiently. In early 1990s, two Swedish economists, Early Hexer and Bertil Olin, focused their attention on how a country could gain competitive advantage by producing products that utilized products factors that were in abundance in the country. Their theory is based on a country's production factor, land, labor, and capital, which provide and funds for investment in plants and equipment. They determined that the cost of any factor of resource was a function of supply and demand. Factors that were in great supply related to demand would be cheaper. Factors in great demand related to supply would be more expensive. Their theory, also called the factor proportion theory, stated that countries would produce and export goods that require resources or factors there were in great supply, and therefore cheaper production factors. In contrast, countries would import goods that required resources that were in short supply but higher demand. After that, one one economist, that is Vasily W. Leontief, proposed this theory, called Leontief paradox, in the early 1950s. Russian-born American economist Vasily W. Leontief studied the U.S. economy closely and noted that the United States was abundant in capital and therefore should export more capital-intensive goods. However, his research using actual data showed the opposite. The United States was importing more capital-intensive goods according to the factor proportion theory. The United States should have been importing labor-intensive goods, but instead it was actually exporting them. This analysis became known as the Leontief paradox because it was the reverse of what was expected by the factor proportion theory. In subsequent years, economists have noticed historically that at that point in time, labor in the United States was both available in the steady supply and more productive in than other countries. Hence, it made sense to export labor-intensive goods. Over the decades, many economists have used theories and data to explain and minimize the impact of the paradox. However, which remains clear is that international trade is complex and is impacted by the numerous and often changing factors. Trade cannot be explained neatly by one single theory, and importantly, our understanding of international trade theories continues to evolve. Now, the modern of firm-based theories. First, the country similarity theory. Swedish economist Stefan Linder developed the country similarity theory in 1961 as he tries to explain the concept of intra-industry trade. Linder's theory proposed that consumers in countries that are in same or similar stages of development would have similar preferences. In this firm-based theory, Linder suggested that companies first produce for domestic consumption. When they explore exporting, the companies often find the markets that look similar to their domestic one. In terms of customer preferences, offer the most potential for success. Lender's country similarity theory then states that the most trade in manufactured goods will be between countries with similar per capita incomes, and intra-industry trade will become the common. This theory is often most useful in understanding trade in goods, where brand names and product reputations are important factors in the buyer's decision-making and purchasing power process. Now, the second theory is product life cycle theory. Raymond Vernon, a Harvard Business School professor, developed the product life cycle theory in 1960s. The theory originating in the field of marketing stated that the product life cycle has three different stages: new product, maturing product, standardized product. These are the basically the product stages. The theory assumed that the production of the new product will occur completely in the home country of the innovation. In the 1960s, this was a useful theory to explain the manufacturing success of the United States. US manufacturing was the globally dominant producer in many industries after World War II. It has also been used to describe how the personal computer (PC) went through its product cycle. The PC was a new product in 1970s and developed into mature product during 1980s and 1990s. Today, the PC is a standardized product stage, and the majority of manufacturing and production process is done at low cost countries in Asia and Mexico. Basically, this product is based on the product life cycle. First, the product has to come in a new product, like the company is starting and giving a exactly different product. That product, then it will mature. Like it is based in the brand cycle or brand stage. Uh, the market is based on that product, and then the standardized product. It's called it is a stage after maturing. Now the third theory is global strategic rivalry theory. Global strategic rivalry theory emerged in the 1980s and was based on the work of Thomas Paul Krugman and Gabriel Langston. This theory focused on MNCs and their efforts to gain a competitive advantage against other global firms in the industry. Firms will encounter global competition in other industries, and in order to prosper, they must develop competitive advantage. The critical ways that firms can obtain a sustainable competitive advantages are called the barriers to entry for the industry. The barriers to entry refers to the obstacles a new firm may face when trying to enter into an industry or a new market. The barriers to entry that corporation may seek to optimize include research and development is the base point. The ownership of intellectual property is also second point. Economies of scale, and then unique business process of method as well as extensive experience in the industry, and then the control of resource of favorable access of to raw material. Now the fourth theory is Potter's national competitive advantage theory. In this theory, in the continuing evolution of international trade theories, Michael Porter of Harvard Business School developed a new model to explain national competitive advantage in 1990s. Porter's theory stated that a nation's competitiveness in an industry depends on the capacity of the industry to innovate and upgrade. His theory focused on explaining why some nations are more competitive in certain industries. To explain his theory, Porter identified four determinants that he linked together. Together, the four determinants are as follows. First is local market resource and capabilities. Second is local market demand conditions. Third is local supplies and complementary industries. And fourth is local firm characteristics. These were the four theories of modern firm-based trade theories. Now, what is the balance of payment? The balance of payment is a statement of all transactions between entities in one country and the rest of the world over a defined period of time, such as a quarter or a year. The balance of payment includes both the current accounts and current account and capital account. The current account includes a nation's net trade in goods and services, its net earnings on cross-border investments, and its net transfer payments. The capital account consists of a nation transaction, financial instruments, and central bank reserves. The sum of all transactions recorded in the balance of payment should be zero. However, exchange rate fluctuations and differences in accounting practices may hinder this in practice. What are the different types of balance of payments, like balance surplus or balance deficit? A balance of payment deficit means the country imports more goods, services, and capital than they export. It must borrow from other countries to pay for its imports. And the balance of payment surplus means the country exports more than it imports. It provides enough capital to pay for all domestic production. The country might be even lend outside its border. So the balance of payment surplus is equal to the current account surplus plus narrowly defined capital account surplus. Some points which differentiate between deficit and surplus are: the country imports more goods, services, and capital than it exports, and in balance of payment surplus, the country exports more than it imports. Second point of balance of payment deficit, it must borrow from other countries to pay for its imports. Now, second point for the balance of payment surplus is country provides economic enough capital to pay for all domestic production. Third point of BOP deficit is In short term, this fuels economic growth. Third point of balance of payment surplus is a surplus boosts economic growth in short term. Now the fourth point, in the long term, it will have to go into debt to pay for consumption. In the long term, in the surplus, in the long run, it becomes too dependent on export driven growth. Now, what is the balance of payment adjustment theories? The classical theory of balance of payment adjustment is economic theory has furnished us with two different approaches to adjustment process. The classical approach explains the adjustment as operating through changes in the price levels of countries as a force which restores equilibrium, and the modern approach should explain the adjustment of as operating through the changes in the levels of national income to restore the balance. This approach are not alternatively theories mutually exclusive through the correctness and modernity of one and the obsolescence of the other. They are rather complementary ways of regarding the adjustment process. Each approach springs from the general body of economic theory current at the time of its inception. The classical approach reflecting the Ricardian systems with its emphasis on price changes. The quantity theory of money and flexibility of cost and prices. The economic approach reflecting the Keynesian theory of income determination, with its emphasis on income changes through multiple effects. Now, the balance of payment adjustment theories continued. The balance of payment adjustment under the gold standard. In this, the gold standard, the classic economists pointed out there were automaticity in balance of payment adjustment as it was developed from Hume and Hume to Marshall. The movement of goods in international trade is considered to be the result of differences in international and in national price levels. Uh, the upward or downward movement of an individual country's price level changes the direction and volume in which the goods flow and therefore changes the balance of payment of the country concerned. With gold standards in operation, differences between foreign receipts and payments would be offset by such gold flows as would, by enlarging or depleting the national monetary stock, produces appropriate price changes to alter demand for the imports and exports of the country, concerned and thus correct the balance. In brief, the classical theory was one of the equalization of prices internationally, adjustment of prices as a result of gold movements being the means of selection, the normal relation of equality at the heart of the classical approach law lay the quantity theory of money, which dominated ideas on general price level determination. The classical theory of adjustment was based on a number of implicit assumptions. The first is the variety of quantity theory of money. Second is the efficiency of banking and arrangements whereby an increase in the money supply had an immediate impact on the domestic monetary situation. Complete mobility of factors within the country concerned. Completely flexible prices. The fifth is in the country and the world at large, acute and controllable reactions of both demand and supply to price changes. David Hume's price-specific flow mechanism. It comes under balance of payment adjustment theories. Hume, an English classical economist, was the first economist to suggest a connection between export and imports. He developed the price-specific flow mechanism to show how an increase in export would lead to an increase in imports, and the FFTP, with this equilibrium, would be automatically corrected through price mechanism. Thus, there is automaticity in balance of payment adjustment under the gold standard. Let us discuss how the balance of payment disequilibrium is automatically rectified. Suppose the world is composed of two countries, country 1 and country 2. Country 1's export, it is an example basically. Country 1's export exceed its imports, and therefore country 2 import exceed its export. Since exports exceed imports in country 1, gold will flow into it, and gold being the basic of currency and credit, the supply of money will expand. Following the rules of gold standard game, when gold is flowing into a country, the country is required to lower the rate of interest. Given the marginal efficiency of capital, when the rate of interest is lowered, it would lead to expansion of investment activities. Now, country 1 will be confronted with general inflationary situations. Now, country one is a very good market to sell, but a very bad market to purchase. Thus, it export decrease and import increases, and vice versa. Now, the balance of payment adjustment under paper currency standard. Under the gold standard, the exchange rate between currencies is fixed, and the balance of payment adjustment is affected by the changing price levels between the currencies. But under the paper currency standard, the adjustment of disequilibrium in balance of payment is brought by the changes in exchange rates between currencies. The changes in exchange rates ultimately bring about the changes in relative price levels between countries. The exchange rate for a currency is the price in foreign exchange terms of a unit of a home country's income, money. Thus, the price of the pound sterling in dollar terms, that is $2.4, and the exchange rate is set to be $2.4 is equal to €1. Clearly, an change in the exchange rate alters the price in the corners for all exports of the country concerned. In the example above, if the exchange rate were devalued to $1 equal to €1 equal to $1.2, then the price of British goods would be halved to United States buyers. If the sterling dollar exchange rate were revalued to Euro 1 equal to $4.8, all British prices would have doubled for United States buyers. Thus, a condition in which the price level is constant and the exchange rate varies is the same conceptually as one in which the exchange rate is fixed and the price level alters. Let us assume that the domestic price are constant and that when the balance of payment moves into deficit, the exchange rate depreciates on the foreign exchange market until the relation between home and foreign prices has altered sufficiently. Exports cheapening and imports becoming clearer to the home country. To adjust the balance of payment deficit, such a system of adjustment finds institutional expression in floating exchange rate system. Let us discuss how export and imports are affected by changes in the exchange rate, in the particular how far the balance of payment is improved by them. Any answer to this question involves us in considering the sensitivity of export and import to price ranges. Not only with regard to the way in which demand for them varies with price, but also how supply reacts to it. In short, we are concerned with the elasticity of demand and supply in foreign trade. These elasticities and are equivalent in deciding whether and how far the depreciation improves the quality values of export minus value of import. It is a formula. So thank you for the presentation. This was my topic and thanks.
Anybody else? Hello. Anybody else?